At my father's will reading, my cousin laughed and said, "I took the money and spent it already, so good luck." The lawyer quietly smiled and slid a folder across the table. "Actually, you might want to read this first." My cousin's smirk vanished as he turned the first page. I knew something was off the second. Before we continue, I just want to take a moment to thank all of you for your incredible support. My channel is so far to reaching 1,000 subscribers, and your help means everything to me. If you haven't already, please consider subscribing. It truly makes a huge difference. I appreciate every single one of you. Thank you so much for being a part of this journey. Now, back to the story. I am a 33-year-old project manager in the tech industry, a man who has always stood apart from his family's legacy, like a shadow against a distant horizon. My relationship with my father, Mr. Thomas, was a battlefield of unspoken words, marked by tension and distance. We never truly understood each other. His values and perspectives never fully aligned with mine, and, in turn, I failed to meet his expectations. We could never find common ground, and as a result, our relationship was strained, lacking the affection and connection that might have bridged the gap between us. When my father decided to adopt David, my cousin, it wasn't a surprise. David was the one my father believed could carry on the family legacy, someone he thought was better suited to inherit the wealth and preserve the family's name. David was everything I was not in my father's eyes: ambitious, driven, and he followed the path laid before him. My father saw him as the perfect heir, the one who could maintain the legacy of our family's business and wealth. With his passing, I never expected the inheritance to be mine. I didn't feel I had earned it, nor did I feel entitled to it. But I came to the will reading, not for the money, but for closure, an opportunity to honor what had remained unsaid between us. With his passing, I never expected the inheritance to be mine, but I came for closure, to honor what was left unsaid. As I entered the law office, the air felt like the calm before a storm, heavy and pregnant with unspoken truths. The scent of polished wood whispered of a history carved into the very walls, while the faint trace of leather seemed to embrace the past with its quiet, unyielding presence. The dim lighting cast long, restless shadows, stretching like memories that refused to fade. Silence lingered in every corner, thick and suffocating, as though the room itself was holding its breath. My hands trembled, curling into fists on my lap, as I sat at the long, mahogany table, its surface gleaming like a battlefield. Though I held no illusions about my father's estate, a knot twisted in my stomach, reminding me that even in emptiness, there is tension. It was the kind of silence that spoke before words, and I felt it in my bones, the weight of something inevitable, yet unknown, pressing down on me. My cousin stood before me like a man carved from marble, untouchable, self-assured, as if the world was his kingdom to rule. His suit, a perfect blend of tailored elegance and cold wealth, wrapped him like armor. The gleam of his polished shoes reflected a man who never had to stumble, and the luxury watch that adorned his wrist whispered of a life spent accumulating power and status. His posture, as relaxed as a king on his throne, and his smug grin told me all I needed to know. He already believed the inheritance was his, as inevitable as the dawn. The transformation in David was nothing short of extraordinary. Once, he was the underdog in the family, working for every scrap of recognition he received. Now, he walked into the room with the stride of someone who had always belonged in the halls of power. The humble man I once knew had been swallowed whole by a sense of entitlement, as though the family fortune had always been destined for him, waiting like a shadow at his feet. Beside him stood Sophia, his wife, a woman whose confidence rippled through the air like a force of nature. She wasn't merely dressed in wealth, she radiated it. Her appearance was meticulously crafted, each movement a testament to the world she believed she was born to inhabit. Her smile, sharp and knowing, was like the glint of a blade, pleased with the power they wielded, untouched by any sense of doubt. Sophia revealed. In the luxury their wealth afforded, wearing it like a crown, proud of her role in shaping David into the man he had become. Together, they were like two halves of a perfect storm, united in their belief that the inheritance was not just a gift, but a natural right. But it was the change in Sophia that struck me the hardest. The grounded woman I had once known had been replaced by someone who now seemed to look down upon those beneath her, as though she had transcended her origins. Her glances at me were like arrows, sharp and calculated, as if reminding me that I no longer belonged to the same world she now inhabited. The law office was a silent stage, and Mr. Liam was its composed actor. As the family lawyer, he was the one who would break the silence that hung over the room. His presence was calm, steady, and authoritative, everything you would expect from someone who had handled countless such readings. He was tall, his face marked with years of experience, the kind that suggested he had seen it all. His gray suit fit him perfectly, and his glasses reflected the faint glow from the overhead lights as he looked down at the documents before him. When Mr. Liam spoke, his voice was smooth and controlled, as though rehearsed for moments like these. He began reading my father's will with a careful precision that mirrored the meticulousness of his job. Each word fell from his lips like a deliberate step, and every pause seemed calculated. Yet, there was something about his gaze, something beneath the surface, that unsettled me. His eyes flickered occasionally, and for just a second, I caught a glimmer of something more, something deeper. Was it anticipation? Or perhaps an awareness that he was the only one in the room who truly understood the gravity of what was about to unfold? Despite his composed exterior, there was an unsettling feeling in the air, like a storm that hadn't yet broken but was waiting to. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but it was as if Mr. Liam knew more than he was letting on. And with each word he read, I couldn't help but feel a creeping unease, the quiet tension building between us, waiting for something to snap. As Mr. Liam began to list my father's assets, the properties, investments, and business interests, I couldn't help but glance at David. His body language was telling, leaning back in his chair, hands clasped behind his head, a relaxed, almost lazy posture as if he had already won. He was basking in what he clearly believed was his inevitable victory, his eyes twinkling with satisfaction. With each mention of real estate or stocks, David's grin widened, a Cheshire cat's smile that grew larger and more self-assured with every word. David's belief that the inheritance was his was so evident, so ingrained in his attitude, that it almost seemed like he had been promised the world. He sat there, on the edge of his seat, relishing every word Mr. Liam spoke as if it were his personal triumph. It was as if David believed that everything in my father's will, everything he had built, had always belonged to him. He didn't just want to inherit, it was as though he had already claimed it. As I watched him, I felt an increasing discomfort in my chest. Something wasn't right. The way he behaved, like a man who had been assured of his place in the will, was unsettling. It was too easy. I wanted to shake the feeling off, but it gnawed at me. The tension in the room grew thicker, and the words Mr. Liam spoke seemed to echo, stretching out longer than they should have. I knew that David's confidence was too premature. Then came the moment when Mr. Liam paused. He stopped reading, and the room fell silent. The only sound was the rustling of paper in his hands. It was subtle, barely perceptible, but I could feel it, an almost imperceptible shift in the atmosphere. A pause that seemed to stretch on, a lingering moment where I could hear the beating of my own heart in my ears. The tension in the room spiked as Mr. Liam glanced up, his eyes meeting mine for a fleeting second before he returned to the documents. David, ever the picture of composure, didn't miss a beat. His grin only widened, and I could see his shoulders relax further, like a man who had already claimed his victory. But I wasn't fooled. There was a glint in Mr. Liam's eyes, a knowing look that made me wonder if something was coming, something that would change everything. I shifted in my seat, unable to shake the feeling that the calmness in the room was about to be shattered. And then, the shift. Mr. Liam's voice, previously steady and calm, now carried a subtle but deliberate change in pitch. The words were measured, and his tone slightly colder, a stark contrast to the warmth he had conveyed moments before. As per Mr. Thomas's instructions, Mr. Liam said, the inheritance, which had been held in trust, was distributed 6 months prior to his passing. He looked up then, his gaze meeting mine briefly, as though weighing the weight of what he was about to say. The moment hung in the air for a beat too long. David's eyes flickered, his smile faltering for just a moment before he quickly regained his composure. The recipient of the inheritance is David, Mr. Liam concluded. David's face lit up, his smirk spreading into a full grin, disbelief giving way to pure triumph. He reveled in the moment, convinced that the inheritance was finally his. With each word Mr. Liam read, David's confidence grew, and his smile widened, knowing he had claimed victory. He sat back, enjoying the taste of success, as though the family fortune had always been meant for him. Mr. Liam paused, his gaze steady as he looked at David. As per Mr. Thomas's instructions, he began. The inheritance, which had been held in trust, was distributed 6 months prior to his passing. The recipient of the inheritance is David. David's grin spread even wider, his confidence now complete. He couldn't believe it, everything he had dreamed of was finally in his grasp. The tension in the room lifted, replaced by his triumphant satisfaction. It seemed like nothing could take this moment away from him. But then, Mr. Liam's calm voice broke through, almost as an afterthought. But, the terms and conditions must be met and served correctly, David. He paused, his eyes locking with David's, leaving the words to hang in the air, thick with meaning. What do you mean about it? Dear friends, are you curious about what happens next? What does Mr. Liam mean by the conditions that must be met? Does David's victory really last? The shocking truth is just around the corner. Stay tuned to find out how this inheritance saga unfolds. If you want to know the final twist and see how David's world unravels, make sure to check out part 2 of the story. Trust me, you don't want to miss it. Below in the comments is the link for the second video for your enjoyment.